Okay, good morning. We're in the middle of Shin Yud Chet, Bishul. We're starting Shin Yud Chet today, Seif Vav. I just want to go back to one thing important. We discussed Bishul Akum. So we learned on Thursday, we mentioned that a chole, for anyone who's sick, even if he's only ein bo sakana, so pretty low level. So ein bo sakana, he's just sick that day. If there is no food, question is, what is there's no food in the house? Tuna, more than that, whatever. But certainly if there is no food, whatever that is, you're 100% allowed, lechatchila, to ask a goy to cook for you on Shabbos. That means he can start the flame, he can cook it, so it's full-blown bishul al yedei non-Jew, and that's normally full-blown bishul akum. So we said 100%, on Shabbos itself, everyone agrees, 100% mutter to eat. That's not a problem. What happens after Shabbos? What do you do with that food for him or any of his friends? Can they eat it? Do we say that since it was cooked beheter, and now since it was kosher, even though it's normally bishul akum, Chazal Gazru and him, they make all the rules. So since beheter it was done, forever it's beheter. You can always eat it. It's kosher food. Or do you say it reverts back to it really was bishul akum, but the special dispensation during Shabbos you can eat it, and then once Shabbos is over, it becomes aser again. So, happens to be, the most poskim clearly say it's 100% mutter forever. It's no bishul akum. Once it was done beheter, there's no bishul akum on this forever. That's the Ramah, the Gra, the Magin Avraham, the Shach, Orach Chaim, and one page of the Mishnah Berurah. There's another page of the Mishnah Berurah where he writes, we have it in Shin Yud Chet in the beginning, and it's brought up again in Shin Chaf Chet. That's where it's discussed more. And so in one page he says it's mutter, and the other page he says it's aser, like the Taz and the Shulchan Aruch Harav. So those are two opinions, and it definitely to me seems like an absolute stira in the Mishnah Berurah.
Where's the
all of the we're in Shin Chav Chet. Shin Chav Chet. I had it here. If you want to know the page, it's in the middle, around Kaf Aleph. It's not exactly there. It's somewhere on that page, or it's Seif Kaf Aleph. I believe that's where it is. Anyway, and then it's also discussed the Ramaz in Yeridea, Kuf Yud Gimel, towards the end, Kuf Yud Gimel. So there is two answers for the Mishnah Berurah to say. In other words, all the poskim, none of the poskim make any kind of a chiluk. Only the Mishnah, there's no stira that I know of by any other poskim. It's either mutter or aser. Only the Mishnah Berurah seems to have two different opinions on two different pages. Two different explanations to explain the Mishnah Berurah could be, to say it's not a stira in himself, is that one he wrote, one his sons wrote, or that depends if it's a chole sheyesh bo sakana, and one case is a chole she'ein bo sakana. But that's not the normative way of looking at it. Okay. Let's continue with Vav. Kli sheyesh bo davar cham shehayad solered bo. Now you have a kli, and it's hot with yad solered bo. Mutar lanichol b'Shabbat al gabei kedera hatzmuna kedei sheishamer chumo v'lo yitztanen. So he says over here, you're allowed to take this kedera, and even you're allowed to do hatmana with it. If you're putting hatmana with something else that was already had hatmana from Erev Shabbos. Right? This is going back to, we learned earlier, if you did hatmana with something, and if it became an Erev Shabbos, and during Shabbos, the blanket, whatever you did hatmana with, got lifted up, you're allowed to put it back on Shabbos. It already had hatmana from before. Here he adds, you can even add a new kli to what was hatmana. The new item never did had hatmana, and it's still very hot. Since you're only adding to something else, and hatmana is al darabanan, you're allowed to. There is an opinion who's machmer, but you're allowed to. Okay? V'yachol atuach piv bebatzek, im yesh lo batzek shani lo shme'etmol. And you're allowed to also seal off a container with dough can't use an item that you can easily do miruach with, to smear it with, But a piece of it's pretty thick putty, and you can't really smear with it. So with using dough to close a container, a lid, that's okay. So that the air doesn't escape. Aval. Ein manichin kli sheyesh bo davar she'eino cham kol kach al gabe kedera shehi chama kol kach she'elyon yachol litchameh mechuma ad sheteh yad soledet bo. So here, you're not allowed to make something that's, however you want to understand it, even if we're saying something, so either it's not mavushal kol tzarko, and then you can't do anything that's going to make something that's yad soledet bo, but you're going to end up cooking. And even if it's mavushal kol tzarko, if it's a davar lach, if it's a liquid and it's cold and it's bishul achar bishul, so then you can't do hatmana with something. You can't add a kli that's cold to something else through hatmana if it's going to turn it into yad soledet bo. I mean, it's pretty simple. You can't take anything that's not fully cooked, or you can't take anything that's a davar lach and warm it up to yad soledet bo. Zayin. There's a few examples. It keeps repeating this idea that you can't make something yad soledet bo if it's going to make it cook. Okay. Zayin. Yesh mefarshim dahad shayla niach kli sheish bo davar cham al gabe kedera hatmuna afilu kli atachton ala eish shari. So this is the halacha that you're allowed to take food and put it on top of a kedera. You have a dish, a pot on the stove, and it's covered up. You can even add something in the hatmana on top of this kli, on top of this pot that's cooking, even while it's on the fire. So on Shabbos, right, you can't take food, this goes back to what we learned earlier, you can't take something from the fridge and stick it straight onto the fire, right, mechse kamavasha, it looks like you're cooking, but you are allowed to put it on top of a pot. Even if the pot is on fire, you're allowed to add it to it. Okay? V'yesh, and then right, we're assuming it's not an issue of bishul achar bishul, or it's bishul. So then it's not okay. But we're talking about, it's mavushal kol tzarko. Let's say a piece of meat and it's dry. V'yesh mafarshim, but there is another opinion, not the halacha, she'im kli etachton ala eish le'olam asar. You can't do it if the bottom pot is on fire. If it's a kli rishon and it's hot, okay, you can do it, but not if it's on the fire. But we say you can eat, the first opinion is even on the fire you can add it. Okay. Yeah, we all like the first opinion. And we see that the Magen Avraham, the Mishnah Berurah points it out, it follows, when you read the Shulchan Aruch, the next one, Seif Chet, he says, the first opinion, Nira Eker, and that goes on, Chet and Zayin. So you'll see. Lehaniach davar kar. Shnidbashal kol tzarko agabe mecham shala eish. Now what if you have something cold and you want to, so we're assuming right now it's a davar yavish. Alright, we'll get to the davar lach soon. So if it's a davar yav, it's dry, and it's already fully cooked, so then you can put it on top of a mecham shala eish. You can put it on top of something, on top of a pot that's on the fire. Yesh omrim, shedino kamanicho keneged hamedura, v'chol davar shemutar lenicho keneged hamedura, b'makom shehayat soledet bo kegon sheyavesh, mutar lenicho al gabe mecham shal gabe eish. So then you're allowed to put it there, not a problem. You're allowed to put it on top of a mecham, next to the fire, as long as it can't go straight onto the fire, but you can put it next to the fire or straight onto a pot that's on the fire. So that's what we just said already is okay. V'yesh omrim dahavi kamaniach al gabe kira lechatchila. The second opinion says no. This is like, since it's on the fire, the pot, it looks like it looks like it's the same gzera of putting it straight onto a kira on Shabbos. Ve'asur afilu im nidbashal kol tzarko. Ve'afilu mistamek viralo. That's right. It would be an isur derabanan if it looks like you're cooking. So then the second opinion says you're not allowed to. Ve'afilu im not nosham lishmar chumo. Even if it's already hot, you just want to keep it there to keep it warm. Ve'rishon nera ikar. But the halacha follows the first opinion. In this case, the more makel opinion. But here he says, if it's a davar lach, so then it's a problem because of bishul achar bishul. Now, this is an important principle. The Shulchan Aruch writes, when is there bishul achar bishul bedavar lach? Only if it's mitzdamek v'afelo. If it helps it to keep, if it's better when it keeps getting warmed up or heated up. However, if mitzdamek v'ralo, but if it gets worse, it dries it out, it's already fully cooked. Now it's only going to dry it out more. It's not going to help anything. Or it just gets more of a burnt flavor and you don't like that. So then, it's 100% mutter. That's the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch. But the opinion of the Mishnah Berurah and generally by Ashkenazim is that it is aser. Even if it's mistamek viralo, then it's aser.
What about 2 cases? By
bishul achar bishul. Orach Chaim just points out that if you're going to be mekel, make sure, like the Shulchan Aruch, make sure that it's, for sure it's mistamek viralo. Because otherwise it's a chashash, even bishul daraisa, if you hold bishul achar bishul, which we do lechatchila. Okay. Tet. Kli rishon. Perush hakli shemishtamish bo ha'esh. So the kli rishon, it was on the fire. Afil achar she'aviru me'esh. Even if you removed it from the fire, but it's still in that first pot, and it's yad seledet bo, mavashel kol zaman she'yad seledet bo. So then it is bishul daraisa. Lefichach asur litein letocha tavlin. So you can't add spices into this kli rishon even if it's off the fire. Aval melach, what about salt? Mutar litein letocha kevan she'aviru me'al ha'esh. But salt, the Shulchan Aruch writes, you're allowed to put salt into a kli rishon if it's off the fire. Because melach and a piece of meat from a cow needs more heat to cook. So if it's a kli rishon on the fire, of course it's aser. If it's a kli rishon off the fire, so the Shulchan Aruch is mekel and says you can add salt and you can add meat. It's not mavashel. Kli rishon is mavashel normally. Always if it's on the fire, and normally if it's off the fire. But there's a few exceptions, like salt and bisra de Torah. Cow meat. Okay. The Ashkenazim will see our machmer. V'yesh mi she'oser l'tei l'toch kli zeh basar maluach afilu hu shel shor. There's an opinion that says it's aser, but the Shulchan Aruch's opinion is that it's mutter. Haga, v'nir li, de below maluach nami aser, ela de naka maluach de below vachi aser mishum dam shabo. So the Ramah basically says, we're machmer, and it doesn't matter if it's salted or not salted. It needs to be salted so that you don't have a problem of cooking with blood. That's a separate issue. V'yesh osrim latet melach afilu b'kli sheni kol zaman shehayat seledet bo. Now there are some who say even in a kli sheni, it's aser to put it inside. So really in a kli sheni it's not mavashel, but since there's an opinion, hamachmer tavo alav bracha.
Don't we usually say when there are 2 opinions in the Chagri, we usually goes with the second one?
So that's by machaber the general rule, and again, not everyone agrees 100%, but the general rule is stam v'yeshomrim, halacha kestam. But if it's yesh v'yesh, then halacha kebatra, the second yesh.
Right, so here we have the second, the yesh.
But the first one is a stam, there's no first yesh. It's a stam v'yesh.
It's stam v'yesh.
Right, and yesh misha omer is not necessarily the same as yesh omrim, but because that's usually just one sounds like more versus one opinion, but it's another small potential chiluk. Okay. V'yesh osrim latet melech afilu b'kli sheni kol zman shehayat zobov. Okay, we read that. V'machmer tavola bracha v'im avar v'natan melech. And now if you put salt in there, afilu b'kli rishon, even in a kli rishon, like the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, the Stam opinion, afilu ala eish she'avad isura mutar machal de melech batel al gabei hamachal. So he points out, even if you made a mistake, certainly like the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, but even if you did it while it was on the fire, and that is real bishul, he says it's okay, b'di'evid, because the melech is batel with the other melech that was already there, or the rest of the food. So therefore, it's b'di'evid, it's okay. Mishnah Berurah just points out that Right. Well, first of all, he points out that Rov Poskim go like follow the Shulchan Aruch, but the Stam opinion, but Lechatchila the Ashkenazim are Machmer. And he also points out that when it comes to salt and sugar, normally nowadays it's already cooked. So since it's already cooked, it's we don't have bishul achar bishul with salt and sugar. There is an opinion that's machmer, in other words, we hold since right now it's a davar yavish, so therefore even though it's going to dissolve and become a liquid, or it can melt or dissolve, then we still hold it's a davar yavish, because right now it's a davar yavish, so therefore there's no bishul achar bishul. But there's an opinion that says if it's going to melt or dissolve, so it goes. We look at the after effect, and since afterwards it's more like a lach, like a liquid. So then, because of that, he says it's good to be machmer, to add sugar and salt, even though it's already cooked, into a kli sheni versus a kli rishon. But that's only a chumrah, and one's allowed to even in a kli rishon, because there's mikar din. There's certainly no bishul achar bishul. Okay, yud. Asur litain tavlin b'kerav v'ertalei mikli rishon. So he points out tavlin, spices, it only cooks in a kli rishon, and it also cooks with an iroi kli rishon. Now we're pointing out now that, we're going to see as the contrast to soon, if you pour from a kli rishon, so the kli rishon, as long as we say it's not nifsak hakiluach, as long as the flow is attached to the pot, you're not like throwing it and then the splash of hot water, then it's separate. That's already considered a kli sheni. But if it's still attached with the flow of water to the original pot, so that has a din of an iroi, the pouring of a kli rishon, and that's called mevashel kadei klipa. It cooks just a little bit. So that's only if you pour it onto a hard item. You pour it onto spices. You pour something dry. You pour it onto a piece of meat. But if you're going to pour it into a liquid, so we're going to see that by a liquid, it's a little different. Mikar, so it depends how much, and when we get there in a moment, we'll see how that pans out for pouring into a liquid. An irei kli rishon doesn't always cook, because it's mevatel, or it gets cooled down from what's ever on the bottom. So we'll see. Yud Aleph. Now here, an ambati perush kli sheroch etzbo, basically a bathtub. I think it would be much bigger than a regular bucket. It would have to be a big container. I think something that people can fit inside. Shel merchatz, right? This is what you bathe into. It's a bathtub. Shehi melea mayim chamim, and it's full of huge hot water. You basically had a flame underneath it, and you boiled up a huge tub. So afal pi shehi kli sheni, and it could even be a kli sheni. This is now. I saw in Dirshu quoting Rosh Shlomo Zalman. I didn't look elsewhere. He says this is only a din darabanan, because here, if it's a klisheni, because it's extremely hot and extremely large amount of water. So even in a klisheni, if it's really hot and it's huge, then it has a special din that you cannot add cold water into it. Because even though normally a klisheni does not cook water, but here we have to be strict. Aval, but you could pour from the ambati, even if from a kli rishon. Mimayim chamim shabazeh ambati letoch ambati acher shel tzonen. But you can take water from a kli rishon and pour that into another bathtub of cold water. The cold water on the bottom is cold, so as you pour in the hot water, the cold water doesn't get heated. It cools down the hot water. It doesn't heat up the cold water. So here it happens to be a machloket. Machloket achronim. The Tur says, even if the cold water is only a little bit, since the cold water is on the bottom, that's more powerful, tata davar, and therefore you're allowed to even add hot water into cold water. But many Mishnah Berurah and other some other achronim, they say no. In order for it to be mutter, it has to be a lot of cold water, so that when you add the hot water, it cools down the hot water as opposed to heating up the cold water.
Why should it make a difference though about how much cold water there is? Because at the end of the day, it's the element of the cold water which touches the hot water that's going to affect it, not the fact that something's 5-6 centimeters below it.
Wait, I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Pour a bit of hot water.
Pour hot water into cold water.
So the presumption is that it's okay because the cold water is cooling down hot water.
Right.
The point is, why, according to the Torah, should it matter how much cold water there is?
No, so the Torah is the one who, it happens to be the Torah is the one who says it's mekel even if it's a little bit of cold water.
Oh, sorry.
But many of the Achronim, the Mishnah Berurah is machmer. It has to be.
Because it's not like the whole volume of cold water is touching the hot water. It's only relevant to the amount of cold water that comes into immediate contact with hot water.
So that's the question. I hear. But the point is, if you're having a lot of hot water, it's not getting cooled down. And there's a principle of irei kli rishon is mevashel kedei klipa. So just on the very top surface of the cold water, all that hot water is considered to be cooking the top surface. It's a question how to view it. Okay. If it would be simple, it wouldn't be a machlokas, right? Okay. Let's see. Let's go on, I think. We covered this, your base. Okay. Just to point out, so there is a very common question mark. What do you do if you want to pour hot water into a cup and that cup has cold water in there? Right? Many times you wash a cup and it's in the sink or the drain board, it's drying, but there's still some cold water in there. Or you have your klisheni cup that you have by your hot water urn, some people use. So you fill it up with hot water, you pour that in to make it a kli shlishi if that's what you want to do. And now you want to keep using the same cup. But by the time you pour in the next cup, it cools down. So I'm just coming to bring it up. This just food for thought. But there are definitely opinions who hold it's always aser. Some say it's mutter if it was originally cold hot water, because then it's a machlokas if you say bishul achar bishul by davar lach, and because there's other reasonings to think that maybe it's okay. So with a snif you put them together, they're more mekel. And some are say even in a kli, even if it was always originally cold water, it's even then it's okay, because you're not mechavein for it, and it's like we said into a kli tzonen maybe it's okay, and there are different opinions. But bottom line is whatever. Ask your Rav, or maybe be machmer, maybe whatever. Believe it. It's a machlokas. But just food for thought, or to look into. Yud bet. Mecham shepina mimenu mayim chamim. So now you have a hot water pot. You take it off. Mutar l'tein l'tocho mayim tzonein merubim kedei lehavshira. So now you're allowed to add a lot of cold water all at once in order to cool it down. Mutar l'tzuk mayim chamim l'toch mayim tzonein or tzonein l'toch chamim. So then, if it's not a klisheni, if it's in a klisheni, it's no problem for sure whatever you're doing to add a lot of cold water into hot or hot into cold. But if it's a kli rishon, so then that's where it could be a problem. Okay. Haga. And if it's a lot of water that you're pouring into, it's not going to get heated up. It's only going to warm up the cold water. Even in a kli rishon, it's for sure okay. As long as it's not on the fire. Right? If it's on the fire, it's going to keep on heating up. So for sure, that's a problem. Yud Gimel. Mutar litain kiton shel mayim ashar mashkim yechli sheni sheyesh bo mayim chamin. So here you have cold water for the first time, it wasn't cooked yet, and it's in a kli sheni. You're allowed to pour it into a kli sheni, that's not a problem, but you're not allowed to take freshly cold water and pour it into a kli rishon that's yatzel leted bo. Even if it's off the fire, a kli rishon still cooks when it's off the fire. If it's still yatzel leted bo. But if it would be a kli sheni that's off the fire, it's never cooks water, except for the one case of an ambati, which we mentioned. Okay. Just to point out, again, another machlokas is what to do with a ladle, like a soup ladle. So if, it's a machlokas. Many opinions says if you're just quickly picking up, using the soup ladle quickly, just to pick it up, that turns it into a kli sheni. But if you leave it in the soup for a little bit, and it heats up like the rest of the pot, then for sure it becomes a kli rishon. So again, there are different opinions what to do, how to handle with the ladle, if it's considered a kli rishon or a kli sheni.
That means your soup bowl will be a kli shlishi.
So that's the machloket, exactly. If the soup bowl is considered a kli sheni or a kli shishi, that's exactly the question. Very good. Okay, Yudalid. Mutar litain kiton. No, we read. No, yeah, Yudalid. What are we? Should we just read one more, or should we stop? Maybe stop. More. Mutar litain kiton shamayim ashar mashkim keneged eish lahafig tzinatan. You can put water next to the fire in order to cool it, just to warm it up a little bit. But ubivad sheyitneim rachok me'ha'eish be'inyan she'enu yachol itchamim be'oto makom ad shetehei hayad soledet perush minchamed v'nichbet bo. Dahainu makom shekreiso shel tinok nichbet bo. So we know, as long as, we mentioned this many times, now recently and also way before, you can take cold water and put it near a fire if it's not going to get hot. But if you're going to put it near the fire, close enough where it can get, right, it's cold water and it can reach Yad Soledet Bo, then it's Aser. That's the only time it's Aser. And he points out, it's hard to tell Yad Soledet Bo based on your fingers, because everyone's hands have a different temperature, have a different sensitivity, different temperatures. But the stomach of a baby, that's more uniform. Okay? Aval asur lekorvo ala eish lemakom shiachol itchamim shetehei yad soledet bo. But to bring it close enough where it's going to get yad soledet bo, that's Aser. Even if you're putting it there just for a few minutes, just so that it warms up a little bit, but you're going to, of course, take it away before it gets hot, it's asur midarabanan, kevan sheyachol itbashal sham, since it could get hot, it could cook there, and you might leave it there and forget about it. Even an apple, orange, whatever, any kind of a fruit, that even if it's edible while it's raw, you can't put it there because if it could reach Yad Soledet Bo, and that would be Bishul. Alright, we'll stop.